Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ryan, and welcome to Central Park. Very happy to continue bringing the park to you through not only in-person programs, but also virtual programs like our weekly walks, these more informal 30-minute walks that occur every Wednesday at 12:30. Thank you for joining us for a weekly walk titled On a Wing with me, Ryan, on today, September 28th, 2022. Now, if you weren't sure about what today's walk is actually based on, the first poll that I'm launching right now should make it pretty clear. Today's walk is going to be on birding and specifically bird watching. So I'd like everybody to vote in this simple poll. Have you ever been birding before or bird watching? Now, as we begin our walk, I want to thank you for joining us and supporting us here at the Central Park Conservancy. We're again the nonprofit private organization that cares for Central Park. Our mission being to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. We're of course using Zoom, so please feel free to let us know where you're joining us from using the chat feature. If you do have a question, use the Q&A feature, and my colleague Jose will be on the back end answering any questions you might have. Last thing, of course, you'll see pop up are the visitor polls like the one I just launched. And then once I get all the results in, I'll share those and we can see what everybody's thinking. You also, of course, will notice live transcripts, which are being utilized on our walks today. You do have the option of turning those off using the live transcript or CC option located on your Zoom toolbar. Now, as we begin our walk, I have a pretty special surprise for us today. Now, we're going to be, of course, taking a walk that's going to be focused around bird watching, a favorite activity of mine to do in Central Park and really any park. But what's going to make this tour a little bit special is you may have joined us on past virtual or in-person tours where we kind of go over the tips and tricks to how to identify birds. Rather than go over those tips and tricks today, I decided to take us on a walk where we can actually spot some of the migratory birds making their way to and through Central Park during the season. And the special surprise I have for you, I'll just quickly share the results first before I share that surprise. And you can see that a lot of people, actually about 55% of the group that's voted haven't been bird watching just yet. So if you haven't been bird watching just yet, you do have the opportunity to join Central Park and see a lot of the amazing birds that come here. And what's great about birding is you don't even need binoculars or a camera, something you can simply do just by walking around the park, especially since many of these birds are inquisitive and come right up to us. Now, the special surprise I have for you today, the reason we've never really been able to do a lot of bird watching tours virtually is because it's hard to get photos of birds. But luckily today, I've had some help from one of our volunteers here at the Central Park Conservancy, the wonderful Bradley Kane. Bradley Kane, who's volunteered at the Conservancy, is also an avid bird watcher and generously provided some photos that we can show today of the birds we witnessed on our walk. So rather than blurry cell phone photos, you'll get to see some professionally shot photographs of birds here in Central Park. Some birds you may be familiar with, like the Mandarin Duck, which isn't presently in the park, but was one of the most exciting scenes to see in Central Park when it arrived in late 2018 and hung around until about March 2019. This bird famously hung out on the pond in lower parts of Central Park. But of course, beyond the Mandarin Duck, there's been many incredible sightings of birds throughout Central Park. We've seen upwards of about 270 species recorded in the park over its 160 plus year existence, like very rare bird sightings like this Kirtland's Warbler. This Kirtland's Warbler was the first ever Kirtland's Warbler recorded in New York City and Central Park. It was found around 2018, and there's roughly only 2,300 pairs of these birds in the world. This was actually a bird that had only been spotted once before in New York State, and that was back in 2014 up near Ontario. So getting this bird in the park in 2018 was one of the most rare bird sightings we've ever had. And of course, you're regularly afforded beautiful rare bird sightings when you visit Central Park. So on our walk today, we're going to check out some of these winged beauties as we start to enter the park at about 110th Street and Adam C. Powell Jr. Boulevard, right kind of in between 6th and 7th Avenue. As we make our way into the park, we're going to immediately dive to the Northwoods. And of course, we're going to keep our eyes and ears open for any birds we might see. And immediately upon crossing the street along the edge of the Northwoods, we hear and see something rumbling in the bush. Could it be a bird? Not quite. It's actually a chipmunk, one of the many eastern chipmunks we see venturing around the Northwoods, scurrying around and making a lot of squeaking noises. These chipmunks are often confused with birds because of their high-pitched squeaks, but they're still fun to see nonetheless. And as we make our way a little bit past this chipmunk, we actually do see something hopping around the bush, something that is a bird. The first bird we get to record on our little bird walk today, a house wren. These birds are so adorably small, and while they might be a little bit more brown or dirty of a color, might not attract a lot of attention like the bright red cardinals, they're one of our favorite migratory birds that can regularly be seen hopping around the grounds, foraging for little insects and bugs. These are a favorite species of mine just because they're so tiny and cute. And as we keep our eyes open in the park, both on the grounds, understories, and canopies, we'll probably see a lot of these types of migratory birds. As we continue moving on, we'll make our way a little bit deeper into the Northwoods, keeping our eyes open in the bushes, shrubs, and just about everywhere in between for more birds. As we continue walking, I noticed something over to our left. Not a bird, but rather some fungus. After a lot of the heavy rains we've been experiencing, we're finding a lot of really cool types of species of fungus around. Like these, I believe they're an onion stalk parasol. Actually got that identification thanks to a former Conservancy member, Aubrey, who is a fungus expert and helped me identify these. These species are often seen growing out of wood chips during this time of the year, which is exactly where we found these. It's a decomposer, so it helps to break down these wood chips. But as we can see from that little fly sitting on top of it, it also can drink some of the kind of sweeter, sugary nectars that are coming from this. And we do see these mushrooms providing, of course, a lot of use for wildlife. So we'll continue our bird walk, keeping our eyes open for more than just birds, as you can see. And as we make our way a little bit further into the Northwoods, we'll have the opportunity to take a little bit more of an off-roading type of path, walking down some of the dirt trails that lead us a little further into these shrubby woodlands and afford us, again, more beautiful views of something jumping around in the bush. We'll have to look a little bit closer and really use our eyesight to try to pick out these birds. But eventually we can see a little something jumping around the bush. We find an American redstart giving us a little bit of its beautiful color. The male American redstarts, which we can see a lot of throughout the park right now, have a nice black top with, of course, those nice bright orange rather than red type of streaks and colors throughout it. These birds are very common to see, and also very fun to watch as they constantly jump all around from branches to the ground, flicking up their tail, as we can see here, which not only shows a lot of color, but is meant to help scare up insects that they're going to be eating. And of course, we see a lot of these migratory birds helping to reduce some of the mass amounts of insects we find around the park. And anybody that's been walking around the park or hanging out in the park the past few weeks, maybe not the most recent week with the cold temperatures we've had, you probably noticed a lot of bugs, because I certainly have. As we continue walking down, though, we don't have to walk too much farther to see more movement and activity throughout the side woodlands that we're walking in. Looking a little bit further, we can see something jump up on the rock. Kind of hard to see, of course, in these blurry cell phone photos, but if I circle it with that red circle, we can see the silhouette and profile of what appears to be a wood thrush. Wood thrush are another type of migratory bird that pass through the park, but a little bit closer in size to a robin. These wood thrush are very beautiful to see as they hop around the ground, trying to catch a lot of insects, much like the American robins actually do. They do have a little bit more brighter rusty color of a top with a little bit more defined black spottings on their bottom. And these birds are often typically heard rather than seen, but luckily we were able to see one on our walk today. You might also notice around the same areas some of these hermit rushes, which look very similar. They're a little bit smaller than the wood thrush we just saw. They tend to be darker brown above with a buffy white bottom. They also typically have a little bit more contrasting of a red tail, but a beautiful bird that certainly looks very similar to that wood thrush we just saw. As we continue walking down, we're coming through the park a little bit towards the evening. And of course, you can bird really during any time of the day, but mornings and evenings tend to be best. I personally come out whenever though, and you'll always be able to see birds because they're constantly in motion trying to get as much food as possible before they have to continue their migration either north or during this season, south. As we walk through this golden hour time of the Northwoods, we can of course enjoy these little off-roading hiking trails, many of which are still covered in dense green leaves that block out all the remaining sites of any buildings nearby. And as we continue down the park a little bit on this path, we can find some of the, of course, telltale signs that we're in a woodland, like fallen dead trees and logs. And while these trees and logs might not seem like they do a lot, they're of course very, very supportive of a lot of wildlife. And a lot of these are the reasons that warblers and many of these migratory birds are stopping in the park in the first place. A lot of insects and food sources exist in these woods. We can see a little spider web located here. And of course, looking a little closer, we can see some of the detail in there. Of course, it's pretty hard to see when we're looking at a standing still photo though. So I decided to include a little video to show you just all of the movement that's occurring on such a small part of the log. As you watch this video, you can see, of course, a lot of movements of legs, antennas, and bodies of various insects, from termites to ants and everything in between. These, of course, provide an ample food source for a lot of wildlife coming through the park, like many of the warblers we've seen so far. As we continue down, we can also see a bird utilizing this food source, like these gray catbirds. Gray catbirds, which we can see a little bit better detail here, thanks to, again, these photos provided by Bradley Kane. We can see an amazing amount of detail in this otherwise sort of colorless bird. Even birds that have darker colors like grays, blacks, and browns still have immense detail in their feathers, which we can capture with this up-close photo of this catbird, of course, enjoying some of the streamways of the loch and the other water bodies found throughout the Northwoods and Central Park in general. We can also see this catbird in a quick little video, firsthand utilizing some of those fallen trees, which provide, again, ample food sources. We'll take a moment to watch this little catbird looking for some food on a fallen log. These, of course, logs and fallen pieces provide so much function to the wildlife of these areas. And as we continue walking down to a more popular area of the Northwoods, we're probably going to see a lot of birds because we're coming along the loch and ravine section. The loch getting its name for a waterway we'll see in just a few moments. But as we start to continue down the path a bit, we'll come a little bit closer to this water source. And of course, see a lot of wildlife that are attracted to the resources that are found around it, like this squirrel, which gives us a traditional little squirrel's pose before very quickly bouncing and hopping off out of view. As we continue down, we'll keep our eyes open for all sorts of wildlife in this wonderful section of the park, which provides a lot of beauty as well. The running water coming from the multiple cascades or waterfalls through this area not only cover up the sounds of buses, taxis, and airplanes, but they also attract in a lot of wildlife like birds. We can also find ample amounts of flora growing around these areas that provide a lot of function, again, not only to wildlife, but even just to our views. Looking a little bit closer, we can see a few different plants here. The one that's in view is spotted jewelweed. Spotted jewelweed is also known as touch-me-nots, not because you're not supposed to touch them, but rather because the lightest touch will actually drop out the seeds that are found within this trumpet-shaped flower. So a small little raindrop, maybe even that little ant we can see crawling on the stem just here in the center of the photo, might be enough weight to knock out those seeds, potentially leading to more spotted jewelweeds growing. But we'll see birds like hummingbirds attract the rich nectar coming from these tulip-shaped or trumpet-shaped flowers, rather. As we move a little bit further up the path, we're walking along the loch, that waterway, getting its name from a Scottish word, which means lake or long river. We're going to see this again being an ample spot to find different types of birds, not only types of woodland warblers, but maybe also things like water thrush that might be hanging along this waterway. As we move our way down the path, again, we have the sun facing us and warming us up, much needed on these cold days. And as we continue down the path a little bit, we'll find ample amounts of boardwalks and little nature blinds that bring us right into the middle of the action and give us some up-close encounters with many different types of birds. As we walk down this little boardwalk, but we could call it a birdwalk, we can look up towards the sun. We actually see something jump up right in front of us to these trees. Looking a little bit closer, it might look like there's just dead leaves in this photo, but we can actually see a bird highlighted in the middle of that red circle. The blurry photo of this bird, these are the kind of photos I typically get with my cell phones, might just make it look like an American robin. But again, thanks to a little bit closer of a look, provided by Bradley Kane and his wonderful photography, we can see this rose-breasted grosbeak a little bit closer. Rose-breasted grosbeaks are appropriately named. They have a very large beak, not really too gross though, but a beautiful light pinkish kind of color with, of course, that signature red breast found on the males. The females tend to look a little bit more kind of brown, much like a lot of the sparrows we see around, but they're a really fun bird to see. One that, of course, is pretty easy to identify using things like its very large bill. You might be able to guess that bill helps it out with eating, and this bird certainly likes to eat a lot of different seeds rather than many insects like the birds we saw just prior to this. But this is a fun bird that we saw on our walk today here in the North Woods, one that you can probably find because it'll most likely hang around for a little while before making the migration down south. As we continue around, though, we can walk just down to this little boardwalk area where we can capture quite a few views as well as traces of birds. Looking close up on these trees that line the boardwalk, might be able to notice a bunch of little holes existing throughout them. These are likely coming from some type of woodpecker, maybe a woodpecker like a sapsucker that's knocking holes in the trees and trying to find insects underneath or attract insects to the running sap, or maybe even a different woodpecker that's trying to just locate little insects in between the cracks and just below the bark of the tree. Either way, these signs certainly let us know that we're in a pretty hot spot for birding. We can also take these as reminders that we shouldn't be feeding wildlife. While we do see these signs around the park, sometimes this message is lost in translation, but it's a great reminder that, again, these wildlife have plenty of food sources, and feeding wildlife really reduces the aspect of them being wild. Of course, it should be a reminder, feeding wildlife often leads to wildlife losing their wariness of humans. Oftentimes, this leads to animals becoming aggressive and usually being put down, euthanized, or forcibly removed. So, of course, as much as we might want to feed wildlife in the park, we do highly advise against it. Many instances, it is illegal to feed wildlife in areas of the park and just in general. And of course, things like baiting is illegal as well. So as much as it might be attractive to do so, we do advise against feeding wildlife, trying to keep, of course, wildlife wild. And as we make our way through the park, of course, we can see all of the resources that wildlife are attracted to. And oftentimes, more often than not, we can find wildlife in their natural habitats rather than nearby a bird feeder feeding seed that we might put out. Looking along this beautiful little golden hour view of the loch, we actually noticed something jumping around one of the fallen logs over there. Of course, hard to see, but as we look a little bit closer, we can capture that bird sitting just on this lower lying branch. If I bring that little circle around it, it'll make it a little bit easier to see. But even in this blurry photo, we can actually see a couple telltale signs of this bird, like that kind of lime green yellow patch on its back, a white wing bar, as well as a little bit of yellow towards its kind of breast or stomach. But of course, we do have a better photo to view of this bird. Thanks to Bradley Kane, we can see this northern Parula that we witnessed in a little bit better detail. Seeing those white wing bars up there, as well as that patch I mentioned, that lime green, yellowy kind of patch on its back, which is a very easy field mark to use to help identify this bird. Really one of the only field marks that I know of and used for this bird, besides its also little white eyebrows and white eye ring. But this is a very beautiful bird to see, one that expresses many of the colors we traditionally find in this group of birds we're calling warblers that come in the park. Wood warblers are referring to a group or subgroup of songbirds, the largest group of birds in the world. Primarily a lot of birds we know like robins, cardinals, these warblers, thrushes. Songbirds, again, make up a large group of birds, but they're primarily what we're featuring in our walk today. This northern Parula, though, is a favorite of mine and one that can certainly be seen in the park during this fall season. As we continue walking a bit beyond this Parula, we're coming towards the end of our walk, but that doesn't mean we're done seeing birds just yet. As we continue through the Northwoods, we can walk on some of these wood chip trails that bring us along the remaining end of the loch. And as we continue along the loch, we're going to see where it leads us, although I'm sure some of you are familiar with where this leads us. As we make our way through the Glen Span Arch that borders the west side of the Northwoods, we can find our way coming up to the sunlight, which is nice because we've been walking through the shady portion of the Northwoods, being a little chilly. So as we come up this really rough cut staircase, we'll walk up into that sun's embrace and get a little view of a larger but still quaint water body known as the pool. The pool right now kind of looks like another grassy lawn, and that's because it is covered with duckweed. Duckweed, as you may be able to guess, is a favorite of ducks. It is a tiny flowering plant that's among the smallest flowering plants in all of the world. And this little plant sort of looks like a tiny little lily pad. It does bloom in excess numbers at times, but as you may have guessed from its name, it is very, very beneficial to waterfowl, waterfowl like ducks. These types of this type of plant, rather, duckweed, can actually support about 80% of a waterfowl's dietary needs. So while it might bloom in large numbers and oftentimes lead to decay, which is one of the reasons you might get a pretty nasty smell during that general area of Glen Span Arch as this duckweed and its excess numbers start to break down and rot. It does cause a little bit of a smell, but it does provide a lot of food for wildlife, like some of the mallards we see here. And as we look over this section of the pool, we'll notice quite a few types of waterfowl, a little bit different of a subgroup of birds rather than the songbirds we were primarily seeing before. Waterfowl, which include ducks, a lot of water-based birds, as you may have guessed, like grebes and cormorants, include these two species of mallards we see here. Now, birds of a feather flock together, but that doesn't always mean they're the same species. And we actually can see two different species of waterfowl in this picture. We might see our traditional mallards over here on the left, many of which we're all familiar with, the males having those green heads, those kind of gray bodies, and females having a little bit of more brown drab color with a little bit of a pretty wing on the back, usually a purple wing. But if we look over to the right, we can see in the middle of that circle and just to the right of that circled bird, a different species known as godwalls. Godwalls from afar might just look like a female mallard, but as we get, of course, a closer photo, thanks to Bradley Kane, we can see this amazing plumage here. Again, just amazing, almost topographical looking types of feathers here. I really love seeing these godwalls up close, and a lot of people, again, don't get the opportunity to see them up close. Because from afar, we might just assume they're another simple little colorless bird. But as we look closer on these birds again, we can get the immense detail that comes from a bird that's simply just a little brown. But these ducks are one of our favorites, a little bit smaller than the traditional mallards, and ones that come up and hang out a lot of times often at the pool, the water body we're walking around at the end of our walk today. Feasting on the duckweed and of course giving us some beautiful views of a migratory waterfowl, one that doesn't hang around year long like the mallards do. But as we continue walking along, we can leave behind these godwalls and we can take a look at what lies on the southwestern edge of the pool. As we walk along this way, we can of course see just beautiful locations to spend this golden hour here in Central Park, with many rustic benches that line this area and provide us a beautiful view over this small but still amazing water body. As we continue along, we can see a little bit of commotion existing just down along the southwestern edge of the pool. And as we go closer, you see none other than a group of birders. Of course, a lot of birders in the park during this season found all around. And of course, keeping an eye out for maybe a rare bird spotting, much like the Mandarin Duck or Kirtland's Warbler that we saw in the beginning of this tour. Central Park actually recently just got another rare bird sighting here. And we see these birders looking over in this marshy area for a bird known as a sora. That's S-O-R-A. Soras are part of the rail family, and rails are kind of closely related to chickens. They're related to chickens in a way because they actually don't have webbed feet, so they kind of just have chicken feet. As they walk around these water body and marshy areas, they can't swim too fast, so they tend to be pretty secretive. This bird we didn't get to see on our walk today, but of course you can find photos online that some people who've waited hours and hours to get a glimpse of this bird have succeeded at getting a beautiful picture of. So I'll leave this as a surprise to you, because I do encourage you to stop by the park or even look online over some of the amazing rare bird sightings that Central Park has housed over its existence. But while we won't see the sora on our walk today, we do have another bird stopping by and trying to steal our attention as we look through the shrubbery. This bird is actually pretty clear in this photo, but still blends in pretty well. If I bring a little circle around it, we can better see the bird that we're witnessing here. And what we're actually starting to witness is a common yellowthroat, specifically a female. As we come and see this bird, I'll launch the last poll I have here. This last poll is just going to be a simple one. It's, do you have a favorite bird to see in the park? Rather a favorite bird actually that we saw on our walk today. I've included most of the birds we've witnessed on our walk today, even the two that we looked at in the beginning that we didn't see in the park presently during this time, but ones that of course have been a favorite. But as we let you vote in that, we can of course view this beautiful female common yellowthroat, one of the many warblers coming into the park, and this female giving us a pretty clear example as to where the yellowthroat comes from. The very widespread warbler that often nests in marshes, which is pretty interesting because it's actually found pretty much all over the United States from coast to coast. You go to a lot of marshy areas and look in the reeds and cattails, you'll probably find, if it's the appropriate location and season, one of these with a nest. These birds are really interesting to see. And actually, just after this female popped by, we got a glimpse of a male common yellowthroat that stopped by. We can see the difference between the female in the previous photo and the male common yellowthroat here. These common yellowthroats are really interesting. They do sport the males, a black mask along with that yellowthroat. These fierce birds, though, they hop around marshy areas, the ground, and parts of the understory, looking for insects ranging from grasshoppers, dragonflies, beetles, grubs, ants, spiders, and practically everything in between. If you keep your eyes open, you might see one of these passing through the park. One of the most interesting things I'd like to mention about this bird is that this is the only warbler to actually make a nest in a marsh rather than like a woodland or somewhere like that. So this is a very unique warbler to see, even though it has common in its name. But this common yellowthroat is a very fun warbler to see around the park, and one that you should be able to spot relatively easily if you see a male. I do want to, as we come to the end of our walk, give a really big special thank you to Bradley Kane, again, for providing these amazing photos. Bradley Kane, you can find him walking around the park, taking photos like these, and we're really thankful to be able to show you the immense detail these birds have. So thank you, Bradley, for providing these photos and more as we make our way around Central Park, specifically in the north end, and go do a little bit of birding. As many of you know, we do provide birding tours here in the park, but you also can find self-guided birding information on our website. And we do encourage you to stop all over the park. The Hallett, the Ramble, and Northwoods are, of course, hot spots, but even visiting areas like the Dean Slope and Wildflower Gardens and Meadows will bring you different types of birds. And of course, stopping by points like even the reservoir in the middle of winter will provide you amazing sights ranging from waterfowl to even bald eagles. And even keep your eyes over Central Park as many hawks are beginning to migrate right now. Really, the birding never ends no matter the season. I do want to thank you for joining us during this fall migration season as we took this little birding walk titled On a Wing and saw quite a lot of wildlife. I do want to share the poll because I know everybody's been voting in what their favorite bird for the walk was today. And no surprise here, we see the Mandarin Duck, it looks like, taking the cake on this one. For good reason, this bird has been nicknamed the Hot Duck. So we can see why a favorite of a lot of people visiting the park, and has been for that about half a year or so that it stuck around. I actually just recently learned today that Bette Midler wrote a book about this Mandarin Duck. So we can see its inspiration stretching far, far beyond, just like its native range, which is over in East Asia, which is why that duck was so rare to see over here, even though it was banded. But of course, a lot of amazing sights to see in Central Park today. We do encourage you to stop in the park and visit some of these sites yourself. And again, go birding. You can also find a lot of course, other programs we offer. If you do have maybe a young one that you'd like to take into Central Park and explore the park, consider coming on our family programs, Discovery Walks for Families, such as the Ramble, which we have a few dates illustrated here. These walks are family but kid-oriented walks that are nature walks throughout the park, ranging in different topics and activities from birding to learning about trees, rocks, a little bit of everything. So we do encourage you to join us for some of our future tours, walks, and virtual programs. You can find some information in the chat box as my colleague shares some links to some of these programs and other resources you can find available on our website. As we do come to the end of our walk, I do want to thank you so much for joining us. And again, encourage you to stop by the park, go birding, and just enjoy the immense beauty of these upcoming seasons that approach. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to keep this chat open for a little bit longer to get to any questions we might not have had time to answer. But I do want to thank you all for joining us. And from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe, be well, and we'll see you soon.